Rich, can you hear us?
Can't hear you. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
There's one or two moments that really come from my childhood watching like movies as a kid that have scared me probably more than anything else. So like that weren't horror. Like they were kids movies. So
But they're still pretty
so
up, aren't they?
so there are two in particular that stand out that even now as an adult they scare me. So one is in Snow White. It was when the queen turned into an old like haggard witch kind of figure. I feel like that. Yeah, I think that probably not even just for me, but I think that even beyond that, it might have potentially scarred an entire generation on old people and like old women in particular, and thinking that like they're scary or something is like bad. Like it's just one of those things where like
That's funny.
probably what helped counteract that was just like when I was younger and I visit my grandparents on the weekends, my grandmother would often take me what we know colloquially as the old folks home. I would go and we would just sit and like talk to the elderly people, and that was just a thing. Like I never really thought about that as a kid. It just was kind of like annoying because all I wanted to do was, watch Dragon Ball Z. So going to talk to old people that I don't know and that are like kind of spooky to me, because now like old people are scary because of that movie or whatever. I think it kind of offset that a little bit, like that image, like even like thinking about it right now, like I don't know what it is about it that's just so unsettling. It's so like unnerving. Like it feels dangerous. I don't know. I don't know how else to kind of like describe it. Just like the sound of her voice.
A special sort of death for one so fair.
The way that they made her mannerisms, like, almost in a way, it kind of feels evil because, like, it really casts a shadow, I think, like, on older people and specifically older women.
But have you ever gone back to watch the scene as an adult?
No.
Really?
No, I haven't. No,
Do you
I
feel
haven't.
like it would
And
cure
and
you?
like it would cure me?
Yeah.
No, I don't. I think that I think that.
I mean, I just watched
like,
it on mute. It's pretty intense, but I don't think I'm gonna...
Yeah, I feel like, and the thing about it is like it's not necessarily like even just that scene. That entire part of the story, like once we kick into that mode, it's almost like a fright fest for me. I don't know. It's very unsettling for me personally. It's still something that scares me. Like I can see her face like right now in talking about it. Like her voice, like it's just, again, it is unsettling. It causes me to fidget, even though I know it's just a cartoon. And even though I know at the end of the day, she still dies. And almost, to be honest, like the scene of like her death, like that was just chaos. Like it was so chaotic. And there was like the rain and the wind, like everything was so spooky. And so, yeah, I just don't think that I don't think that could ever be like undone out of my brain. And then another one is Sleeping Beauty. There were a couple of moments in it that were incredibly creepy. But her talking about like that curse, and like you can like see it, right? Like the that little prickly thing, that pin and the will, like just something about like her voice.
Quite a glittering assemblage, King Stephen. Royalty, nobility, the gentry, and... how quaint. Even the rabble.
And also every time there was like this weird like green like aura, like around, like I don't know, man. It's just
Yeah, she's intense.
again frightening, absolutely frightening. And then there's one where like she's there and you just see like her eyes. It's a thing that like creeps me out. Like it creeps me out. But crazy enough, like I love that movie. Snow White, I could go without ever seeing again in my life. Not because I hate the movie, but like I just don't have any kind of like draw to see it ever again.
See, the scariest scene in Snow White to me is when she goes into the haunted forest. And
well, yeah, that's crazy.
And everything
That's what disturbed me as a kid.
Suddenly has eyes. The trees have eyes.
Oh, yeah.
The logs
trees.
have eyes. The trees are grabbing at her dress, trying to pull her into the forest. I just watched the scene on mute. It's still terrifying. She like falls through the forest floor into a bog, and the logs look like crocodiles. Like, and then she gets so like just overwhelmed by the fear that everything around her is trying to kill her that she just like passes out from fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just kind of like, and then she falls over.
I don't know why that one isn't, why that didn't have the effect on me that you know the queen turning into, you know, an elderly woman did for me.
Dude, kids movies have some of the gnarliest. It's so weird. It's such a whiplash.
Yeah.
And also, Snow White went kind of hard for being like the first full-length animated movie ever.
Basically, all horrors scare me. And the only way that I watch them is like vicariously through other people doing reactions. Like I don't sit down and like watch them. I just don't sit down and watch them. It's not going to happen. You know, for example, when we watch horror shorts or whatever else, right? While I'm watching the thing, I get the heebie-jeebies. But then once we're sitting there and we're talking about it, right, it's easy for me to pontificate at that point because, like, I know that we're out of the thing, right? But when I'm, like, experiencing it, I'm experiencing it. And there, like, I can't, like, turn that off, which I've been, like, learning to really explore more, like, as an artist, is digging into the emotions and the feelings that I'm getting from something at any given time.
Now, let's be kind of fair, though. That witch in Snow White is pretty scary. She asks the mirror, who's the hottest gal in town? And the mirror says, this child. And so she hires a hunter to go carve out the child's heart. And when he can't do it, she runs into a forest that she thinks is trying to kill her. To be fair, even on paper, the whole thing's pretty horrifying. She's a very cruel, malicious character who wants nothing more than to murder a child. She is an attempted child murderer.
Her being aesthetically frightening is more scary to my, whatever you call that part of my brain, than any of the actual concept of like the disgusting things that she's trying to do.
One thing about that transformation scene, just Snow White again, it almost kind of looks like she bit off more than she could chew, because it almost looks like she starts choking. Like she's like, oh, what did I just drink? And it's almost like it strains her body. It contorts her bones to gnarl her fingers and makes her hair turn white and shrivels her up. I mean, fair enough. It's pretty intense. For me, one of mine that possibly is more scary now is Gmork. Gmork is a character from the Neverending Story. He has the appearance of a black wolf. Did you guys see the Neverending Story growing up?
Bits and pieces.
Yeah, I saw it once as a kid.
So essentially the idea is that there's this super duper fantastical land that this kid's reading about, and it turns out to be real. But it's under threat by this presence called the Nothing. The Nothing is essentially a metaphor for like growing up, and that fantasy world that is real would be destroyed because nobody believes in it anymore. Nobody believes in the chance of possibility anymore. Gmork probably scares me more than the Nothing. It is a servant of the Nothing. It is an underling. It wants it to happen. It wants to propel this destruction of childlike belief forward. Apparently in like the book, there's other villains that are behind the Nothing, but as far as the movie goes, the Nothing is the villain. And Gmork is a servant of the Nothing, and he's just like, yep, I'm cool with this. My only job is to find this one kid and kill him, because he's the biggest threat to the Nothing that there is. The animatronic for this thing was gnarly. In some ways, I honestly think animatronics are scarier than digital effects, because there's just something more unnerving about it. I mean, when you first meet this thing, the camera just zooms into a pitch black cave, and its eyes just light up in the dark, green with black slits in the middle, and then lightning lights up its face, and you just see like its mouth and its teeth. It's pretty gnarly. I don't know, the way that the animatronic's eyes would widen was like startling to me, because it might cut to a shot of the kid being like, what's happening? Like the world is shaking, and then it cuts back to this monster, and its eyes are so damn wide. And at first I'm scared because I'm a kid, and I'm just like, oh, you know, it's a creepy wolf thing. Sure, whatever. Its eyes glow in the dark. And then as an adult, it's scary because it's like, oh, not only is it like okay with just the idea of childlike wonder being completely extinguished so that it has an easier time manipulating people when they're fully grown, it's complacent in that. It has no particular will, drive, initiative, or dream of its own other than to propel the squashing of everyone else's. To me, that's almost scarier than the thing that wants to do it, is something that's okay with it.
Because people who have no hopes are easy to control. And whoever has the control has the power.
He was voiced by Alan Oppenheimer. Oh, he's still around. Born in 1930. Still kicking. That's one of mine. I'm trying to think. I don't think anything that's freaked me out, I don't think it's been like transformation sequences. Usually the Mac Daddy of transformation sequences that I hear scares people the most is American Werewolf in London.
I was literally going to say that one.
Yeah. American Werewolf in London. That transformation scene is gnarly.
It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And it looks really good. Like, clearly you can tell what's fake. But
Sure.
It's still, like, it looks horrific. And I think that's the part with, like, horror where transformation can be quite unique when you feel the pain of the person who's going through that transformation.
Oh, yeah, you feel it in that scene, man.
And you feel that, like every bone that's crunching or twisting, like every it's just
It's nasty.
That's up there.
What's funny is the two movies I've seen that have influenced my dreams the most are easily Jaws and Jurassic Park. But like, I've seen those movies multiple times. The part in Jaws that unnerved me the most is because I also was like a 9-year-old boy when I saw that movie. So seeing one get chomped on was a little unnerving. And what was one of the bloodiest scenes of the movie, really, they did not have a lot of mercy on that kid. And Jurassic Park, there's no particular scene that ever I was like, oh, this is so scary. But I've had so many random dinosaur dreams. I've had dreams about raptors being somewhere in the school I went to and me not knowing where. I've had dreams about, for some reason, somehow, I was responsible for letting a T-Rex into a supermarket. It was walking through, like, the Costco freezer section. But no, like, I don't have any dreams, like, about other favorite movies. I don't have dreams about, like, The Dark Knight or Memento or 12 Angry Men. Like, the things that scare me are not like the Freddys or the Jasons or the Michaels.
Same here, yeah.
I think the scariest thing approaching a slasher villain to me was probably Pennywise. Probably Pennywise, because it's not even really human. It is a cosmic entity of some sort. I wasn't sure how graphic they were going to get with the Georgie scene. I was kind of surprised how graphic it was. Like, I could think of a million ways it could have been worse, but still, anytime you see like a suffering child on screen is just very unnerving. Rich, you might know this one when I say this scares me, because this is a very, very different type of horror than just slasher or whatever. It is an anime / manga. I can't remember if I mentioned it to you before when we said we were going to talk about this. It's called Berserk.
I've seen images, and then I saw a little bit of the show, not a full episode, just like a clip or two.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this is something else.
The aesthetic of, so there's the comic, the manga, that's still going, although RIP to the author, he had a team trained up that's taken over for him. Then there's a 1997 anime that covered like, what, it might kind of be like more the second big arc than the first big arc. But then that same material was covered again in a 3-part like movie, divided like 3-part movies, 3 movies, a trilogy. And honestly, that part of the story isn't even this. It's not really the scariest part, because basically the way that I consumed Berserk, kind of the way it starts, you're like, oh, clearly there's like supernatural entities in this world or whatever. But then it just kind of flips on a dime and becomes like total medieval fantasy. This story about like castles and kings and armies and the things you have to do to get power and the people that you hurt in your pursuit for it, whether they're your own people in your own armies. It's about this guy who's trying to like build a peaceful land and rule over it, and a lot of people believe in his dream.
I don't regret. I don't feel guilty, but I'd rather sacrifice myself than watch any more innocent children die in the name of my dream.
I was watching the 1997 anime version. About 1/3 of the way into it, they just encounter this monster that, especially with Guts, just like it's the first time Guts just gets his handed to him. It made me go from feeling like my hero is the strongest to my hero is a drop in the bucket compared to these things that are out there. And eventually the story gets to a point that if you guys have not heard or read about, it would probably not be particularly wise for me to go into it in detail. All I'm going to say is everyone calls it the Eclipse. It is one of the most infamous and horrifying plot points in anime / manga to date. It is grotesque, heartbreaking. Some people say it's brilliant. Some people hated it. The Eclipse is one of the most horrifying plot points in all of media, and I had never heard of it before it was thrown in my face for this show. Most of this time, I'm like, this is a medieval fantasy with a couple of monsters here and there. And then this event, the Eclipse, happens, which Joseph is Googling right now. And I just straight up did not know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with it. It was such a hard rug pull for me. In like I just had no idea what I was in for. And from that point on, essentially, the results of the Eclipse essentially are that the main character is cursed with a brand. As long as that brand is on him, demons and apparitions will always be attracted to him until they can kill him. He can never truly rest, never truly sleep, never truly be at ease, just after seeing the most horrifying event of his life. Just to paint an image of how damn bleak Berserk is. The world is so dark and depressing that the reason the main character is named Guts is because a traveling caravan finds him as a baby underneath the body of his mother, who was executed by hanging from a tree. He fell out of her, and so they just call him Guts. That's the origin of the protagonist. Berserk is bleak. Part of what makes it kind of worth the journey sometimes, even though it's the only time I've ever read a comic in my life where I was like, this is so bleak, I gotta stop for a few days, is because it makes the hopeful moments feel incredible. It's one of those things where I'm like, oh, it's incredible, I recommend it. Don't watch it, don't read it, don't do it. But it's so good. But, also, don't. Different kind of horror, not slasher horror. It is just a bleak world that is out to get the characters, and these characters can never, especially the protagonist in particular, the protagonist as well as the female lead, they can never really be at ease, or they'll die. But yeah, it's a good show, really good. You should watch it, but don't. It is so good. Don't watch it. But don't. The art in the comic is incredible. Like, this guy and the team that he trained, like, they draw. We're talking about a story that a huge chunk of it is, like, honestly a medieval battle epic fantasy type story. This dude draws, like, every link of chainmail on everybody. It's insane. I don't know how he had the patience to draw all this out and be like, I will tell my story in the most methodical way possible. But his art is unbelievable. Just every scale on a dragon, every nick in a blade from previous fights. It's gorgeous.
Off the top of my head, one thing that kind of comes across as something that has always stuck with me, and I saw it when I was like, I think maybe 12. Might be basic, but I don't care. It stuck with me. Insidious, pretty common for a lot of people, but it works, and there's a reason why people put it in their top 10. Not movie wise maybe, but scene wise.
Yeah.
When the weird Darth Maul looking demon thing
is like behind the
haunting,
guy.
Yeah, behind Patrick Wilson, when they're talking about, I think when he was a kid, when the mom's over. And they're having a discussion with the parents about what's going on with their son. And, oh, funny enough, you had this same thing too. And, basically there was this thing that was in this corner and it said, I want your son. And then the door slowly opens and then there's this man, this figure in the shadow. You can't see him, but it's a shadow of a thing with creepy pointy hands that's pointing to the kid. The whole vibe of that movie is just amazing for being creeped out, because James Wan knows what he's doing, and I think he's a great director, not just a horror director. But with that film, it just got under my skin, specifically with that scene that builds up to then you then see what it looks like, because the mom looks at her son and sees like this redded with like some black lines over his face, peering right behind her son, and just completely scares the crap out of her and also pretty much anybody who watches that movie. Yeah, that was like, I'm turning on all the lights, screw that. It's how you do a jump scare, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, jump scares, and I'm like, here's the thing, jump scares do work. Sometimes they don't, but when they do, they freaking work, and I'm not mad about that, because it got me, and it lingered too, because sometimes jump scares can be quick and you can move away. That one, I feel like that's up there for one of the best jump scares. When I think about horror, that's a scene I think about. And I don't feel like I'd be alone there. And another film that kind of messes with me is in Hereditary. Pretty much anything in Hereditary.
Is crazy.
The director is phenomenal. He shout out to a film that no one has seen. And if people have seen it, they probably didn't like it. There's very few of us that do think it's a fantastic film.
I saw it with Anthony. He at the end of that, he was a little freaked.
It's creepy, and like,
and he doesn't get freaked from movies.
It's the stuff of like nightmares, but also, God, I'm laughing uncontrollably. Like, this is what Ari Aster can do. And his masterpiece, I think, still is Hereditary. It's horror, and it deals with demonic possession. It deals with so many different layers of like family and expectations we might have, and the reality of like your reality today, and this is where you're at, and also the reality of loss and how it can be so like.
Don't you swear at me, you little Don't you ever raise your voice at me. I am your mother. Do you understand? All I do is worry and slave and defend you, and all I get back is that face on your face. So full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed. Well, now your sister is dead. And I know you miss her. And I know it was an accident. And I know you're in pain. And I wish I could take that away for you. I wish I could shield you from the knowledge that you did what you did. But your sister is dead.
It just tackles a whole lot in that film. And then there's one scene, though. Like I said, there's a lot of scenes I could say. I think that whole movie's just creepy. It's with the mom, and she's basically cutting her head. And all of it, like her head off, like clean cut.
Her own head off.
When you get the reveal that it's the mom floating up in the air,
with like
cutting
a
her head
piano
off.
wire or something.
Yeah, it was. Oh yeah,
She's
it was a
like
wire
just
of some.
Pulling a piano wire back and forth.
Yep.
Until.
Looking directly, like just like this kind of gaze, like.
Just like looking at him, it was so freaky.
Nightmares. That's nightmare fuel for me, and I love it. I think it's a fantastic scene that just kind of it sets its goal in an exceptional way. That's an incredible payoff for what Ari Aster was trying to do with that character, in a terrible way. I mean that for the sake of obviously like the character itself, it's horrible, but as a viewer and the experience, it was amazing. I could think of so many more. I think a fun one that's not necessarily a scene, but just something that when I think of horror, yet again, it works. Like I don't even have to see it, I can just hear it. And it's the score from The Shining. That score is haunting. That theme brings me back to the flooded elevators, the twins that are just staring you at the other end of the hallway. Jack Nicholson, there. That's all you need to say about that whole film. Music can be such a powerful antidote for an experience. And I think The Shining score does that for me, but in a horrifying experience where it's like, in a funny note, they used it in Ready Player One, and that was kind of comical. But as the film, The Shining, it's an experience that gives me goosebumps. And I know I'm weird, but I love that feeling. The feeling of just kind of the haunting. I think horror is just such a fun genre to talk about, like for like what scares us, of the reality of certain things. That's why I brought up Hereditary especially, because there are some themes behind that film that are horrifying, like being like failing as a brother, failing as a mother.
Yeah, the movie is
very real.
Thoroughly horrifying in more ways than just like the spiritual and psychological dread that the movie instills. But the movie did a really, really good job tying them together, like leading the dread of failure into like this mental breakdown that essentially turns more or less into a possession movie, where the breakdown just becomes more and more unhinged until just nobody's even themselves anymore.
I don't see people talking about Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass on Netflix exclusively. He's done a couple shows for Netflix now after he did, I believe, Dr. Sleep. He did Oculus. He did the movie Hush. And then he did The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass. One show that I didn't watch, but I'm trying to get into, I forget what it's called, but I've heard mid things about it. And then he just recently did the Fall of House Usher, something like that. It was actually,
Usher.
yeah.
Oh, I
that
love
was pretty
that.
solid.
Oh, you saw that? It's on my list. I haven't
Yeah.
seen it yet.
I remember Richard talking about that.
Yeah, I did see it. It was fire.
It's-
I was surprised I liked it, to be honest.
Midnight Mass, that is, it's essentially, it's a vampire story. If anyone has ever heard of Salem's Lot, it's pretty much like Salem's Lot, people are stuck on this little small town village, and there so happens to be a vampire there. But it's different though compared to Salem's Lot, where it's more about the aspect of faith involved with a particular pastor that is somehow connected to all of this. If people have not seen it, I highly recommend it. It's fascinating on a conversation about what guilt can do to people. And that, to me, why I brought it up, was the stuff of nightmares for me. Because there's one scene in particular that's really just a dialogue sequence between two characters. And there is a jump scare that happens after, but it wasn't even that moment. It's just the despair in some people that can haunt somebody. And that can bring this sense of like trauma to them. And I don't know why, but there's this one moment between these characters that kind of just hits you in an uncomfortable level that just leaves you feeling like there's no hope. And if a scene can do that to somebody, they deserve all the applause. I guess for me, the stuff that really gets under my skin is the reality of things. And sometimes the supernatural stuff. Not so much like ghosts, goblins, ghouls, whatever.
Well, I'll give you one, Joseph, because we watched it together. Was 1977's Suspiria.
Ooh.
That one did creep me out. Back in high school, Bravo put on a list when I was in high school. So I would have been about 15, 16 years old, of the 100 scariest movie moments of all time. And I'm sure you can guess the Freddy's on there, the Jasons, the Michaels. They're all on. Silent Phantom of the Opera's on there. I think it was number 25. Number 24 was Suspiria for the opening scene, which is a pretty gnarly, messed up double murder in which a woman looks out her window because she feels like something is following her. And when she puts her lamp to the window to look out, suddenly there's just eyes looking back, just floating there, just looking back at her. One thing that confuses me is in one cut of this movie, the eyes are green, and another cut, they're orange. I've yet to be able to figure out why this is. But the movie stars a woman named Jessica Harper, and it was done by Italian horror maestro Dario Argento. Dialogue in this movie is very, very strange, and I never knew why. Turns out, when he originally wrote this movie, which is about a coven of witches using a ghost to hunt down students at a dance school, the original idea was that the ballerinas were going to be about 12 years old. There's definitely gnarlier deaths out there in horror movies, but to watch children get, like, stabbed in the heart or have their throat cut, that's a lot. Fortunately, Dario Argento's father was in charge of the studio, called in his son, and was like, "You're not doing that." So, what they did was they moved the actors' ages all up. So these ladies are closer to like early to mid-20s, but they kept all of the dialogue exactly the same.
Because I was Pat's friend. She was telling me something when you suddenly showed up. She got scared and she ran away. So
all of these actresses are saying dialogue that is meant for children, and it almost gives the movie like this bizarre, even outside of its aesthetics, which I'll get to in a second, it gives it like this bizarre, weird dream quality to it. Like people just aren't quite talking right. They don't sound the way they should. They're not saying what you think an adult would say in these situations because it wasn't written for an adult. It was one of the last movies to use like 3-strip Technicolor. So the colors popped like crazy. The reds were crazy red. The greens were hella green, and so on and so forth. There's just something that genuinely gets under. I mean, for sure, to me, the scariest scene is just the eyes being out the window. There's something about being watched like that gets under my skin, but it gets under my skin even more when the eyes are all you can see. Another movie that did a good job capitalizing on my fear of that also had one of the coolest monster designs in any recent horror movie. Was a Netflix horror movie called The Ritual. The Ritual's monster design was crazy. It was based off of like an actual Nordic monster, I think, but when it almost looks like a mixture of a living tree, a giant deer, but its eyes are just not where you think it should be. They're almost at like the base of its neck. They're immensely yellow with a black slit in the middle. It is a very cool but freaky monster design. But Suspiria got under my skin for sure. Its visual aesthetics alone, you know this movie when you see it. I've never seen a horror movie that looks like it before. In some ways, it's gorgeous. But because it's about, a coven of witches sending a ghost to murder people, it's also, pretty gross. The opening double homicide scene is very intense. It's very loud. The band, they got to do the music. I think it was a rock band called Goblin, but they don't play like rock music. They don't get up there and they're like, all right, now for a double homicide. Ja, 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 and the double bass pedals come flying out. No, it's a lot more like wind chimey and synth and xylophone and just more windy, ethereal type sounds. It is very well regarded as like one of this director, if not his best movies. It does just kind of like end. It's a pretty abrupt ending. It was remade in 2018 on Amazon Prime. The score, it builds to a point where it is immensely loud. It becomes just this overwhelming cacophony to your aural senses. And then it just stops. And when it does, sometimes it stops and something happens. Sometimes it stops and nothing happens. I remember when I watched it with you, Joseph, and those eyes came up, you just went, "That's creepy." That was it. That's all you said. That's creepy.
One of my most cherished, I think we did either a double feature, or it was like a whole week where we watched like a different scary film. And that was one of them. And I think I'll always cherish that because that is a pretty creepy film. And it's something that I kind of think about periodically. And I still want to watch the new one. It's one of those films where I say that and then I never do it.
Yeah.
I need to commit to that. It's that and Sleepaway Camp. Those are the two films I will always cherish. And
Sleepaway Camp is crazy. Rich, you gotta see Sleepaway Camp. Sleepaway Camp was on the my favorite podcast, How Did This Get Made? A podcast about bad movies. It is a horror, it's a slasher, it's not very scary. It is known for a particular plot point that came so out of left field that it just threw the movie into the Hall of Fame on just batshit crazy movies. It's nuts.
10 out of 10 ending.
Oh man.
10 out of 10.
It was crazy. That could be our next watch react is Sleepaway.
I give it basically a 5, but really I want to give it a 10.
Oh, that's one of those movies that goes on the minus scale where movies start to become so bad they're good. Like The Room is minus 10 out of 10. It's so bad it's good, but it's incredible in the mannerisms with which it does it. This falls into that for me. For me, Sleepaway Camp was minus 8 out of 10, something like that. This is a really solid, fun movie to watch. It's definitely better with a group of people, for sure. It's not a movie I recommend watching by yourself.
There was at least 3 films that had that premise of stupid teenagers doing stupid things, and we still have some of those, like Talk to Me. Highly recommended if you guys haven't seen it. There's actual plot instead of let's go do it in the woods while this guy hacks through our bodies. I don't know. I think I've seen that like 25 billion times. Let's try to do something else. Let's move forward from this.
When I see
same
scenes
thing.
like that, I just imagine the guy writing it being like, "This is so good."
Then she takes off her, and then he brings the axe, and I'm like, yes.
The only time I've ever
10
seen
out
a
of 10.
movie where I was like, I get it because it's making fun of all of that was Cabin in the Woods.
Oh, yeah.
That's about it.
That one gets a pass because it knows what it's doing, and
I got angry
it's
when I saw
smart.
that movie because I saw it. You remember the theater in Federal Way, the $2 theater?
Oh, yeah, the Galaxy Gateway, baby.
I went there on a $1 Tuesday to go see it, and it was packed. There were a lot of people there, and some lady brought like her 7-year-old child, and the kid got
Perfect.
like upset and wanted to leave, so she takes him out. Like 5 minutes later, she comes right back in with him. I was like, did you just pressure your child back into like being traumatized at 7?
To a $1 movie?
A $1 movie.
A
That's crazy.
$1 movie. Unbelievable, dude.
I've been waiting my whole life to watch this. You're not gonna make me.
I've been waiting all
You're
my
not gonna
life
make
for
me miss
Cabin in
this.
the Woods. It was a fun movie, though. It was a fun time. Poking fun at all kinds of horror tropes. And I love Sigourney Weaver, so it's always pleasant to see her in a movie. Another thing I feel like about movies, especially when it comes to like slashers, which I said I was going to touch on this earlier, is that we're getting to this really weird point now where indie movies are having a better time getting off the ground. Low budget things are getting by that don't have to be rated by the MPAA, and they make it to the theater. They don't even get an NC-17. They just go in as unrated. Now, I would have to look it up. Was In a Violent Nature rated?
Oh no, not rated.
Not
Yeah.
rated. Okay, In a Violent
Not
Nature was
rated.
not rated. Because the violence in that it's infrequent, but it's pretty gross. It's pretty intense. And then you have streaming networks like Amazon and Netflix. They don't have to get anything rated. They could just put it up and it can be gross. So they started doing that with the Terrifier series, where suddenly the movies started to be less about like fear or thrills and more about like how many different creative ways can we take a person apart. And I don't even know if I would say it's like scary. It gets to a point of being like too cruel. Like I don't even. It's not like I don't want to look at this because it freaks me out. It's like I don't want to look at this because it's like gross. I mean, I'm not gonna deny the prosthetic work in these movies. I saw on YouTube Terrifier 3 is out and everybody's like, oh man, it's crazy. Da, 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 da. There's signs up saying like, this movie's not rated, FYI. It is incredibly bloody, FYI.
And it says like at the Regal Theater, a sign like that where it says if you don't feel okay, you can please come talk to an employee.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
saw a
now
picture.
they're offering therapy. I guess at theaters.
We have
Hey,
a
it's okay.
therapist on call if this movie f***s you up.
Do you want some popcorn with your trauma? Is that what you want? Some butter on that? Yeah. By
But-
the way, talk to me about your life.
But there's also a difference between like how creatively can we take someone apart with a chainsaw, and which I did see that scene because it was on YouTube. Like
yeah.
I actually watched it without sound because I felt like I felt like that would actually take a lot of the punch out of it, and I think that was actually the right call. Because when I'm not so focused on how it sounds or who's screaming or this, that, or the other, like there were shots I could tell, like, okay, Rich, this is a real thing that happens in this movie. In this movie, a crazy killer clown demon man runs a chainsaw up a guy's butt.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
I'm not even kidding. And it's very
The
bloody.
theater erupted.
Oh, sure. I'm sure they went
It
nuts.
erupted.
But when I had the sound off, I was able to like notice and focus. You can tell when something is a prosthetic shot. You can totally tell. There was nothing about it where I was like, oh man, it really looks like he just chainsawed a real guy up the butt. It was gross. Don't get me wrong. It was immensely grotesque. It's also the kind of scene you think it would be. He goes to like a college and there's a couple in the shower, so he takes a chainsaw and cuts through the shower door and goes to town. And yes, it is very, very gross. Do not get me wrong. Good job on the prosthetics. To me, that's not even the most upsetting scene in this movie. The most upsetting thing that I'm starting to see some horror do is when cruelty is the point. In this movie opens. This movie opens with one of the cruelest scenes I've ever even heard of in a movie. If you have children, skip to this time. We'll put it in the video somewhere because it is really up. The movie opens. Is it Christmas Eve when it opens? Does the movie open on Christmas Eve? It does.
It's either Christmas Eve or a couple days before Christmas, because I think the dad starts saying like, or the mom's like, it's just a couple days, honey.
Oh,
it's not Santa yet, or something.
We're
like
2
that.
weeks from retirement, honey. One of those kinds of things. I mean, I'll tell you the short version now. There's a husband, a wife, and 2 kids, and 0 survivors. I'll tell you that. There are no on-screen killings of the children, but the parents there are, and there's the aftermath of one of them. So in this movie, they're like, hey, honey, we're 2 weeks from retirement. The parents go to bed, and the daughter wakes up hearing noises coming from her brother's room. The noises are of him being murdered. The noises are of axe swings, or, you know, if you're a Foley artist, the noises are someone swinging something into vegetables and breaking them. If we want to be more practical about it and tell you how they made the sounds instead of being like, it's a child being destroyed. If that just eases your stomach. Then the girl goes and hides, and the clown goes to the parents' room. The mom wakes up next to her husband, like, who is already dead, but sees him being cut up, like taking an axe to the leg or the arm or the neck, just whatever. It's gross. She freaks out and she runs, gets downstairs, and sees sees her son's dead body. As does the audience, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Joseph?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We see it.
The audience sees the dead son, who is in literal pieces. Literal pieces. And before she can get out, he kills her too. Now, I guess the reason I bring this up is because, yeah, sure, it's scary. Oh, horror, thrills, Something about a writer sitting down, having the creative flexibility to put anything they can imagine, pen to paper, and deciding they're going to write out a character whose last memory is seeing her dismembered child on the floor before she dies is immensely cruel. Immensely cruel. So much so that I feel like the cruelty outweighs any of the fear that could have been instilled by other methods. And the cruelty became the point more than the fear. I mean, there's another scene where the clown guy, his name's Art, right? Art the clown.
Art the clown.
He kills a mall Santa and becomes the mall Santa. And a bunch of kids run up to open presents, and one of them's a bomb. It explodes. You don't see the kids die, but you see pieces of them all over the place. Like,
yep.
Why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we making cruelty the point when you have the limits that an empty piece of paper provides you when you put a pen to it? I think a writer should be able to do better to instill fear in its audience without having to resort to that kind of unnecessary cruelty. Honestly, I think it contributes to the death of good horror. Is it to make you more afraid of the villain because he's like, nah, I'm not afraid of killing kids? Is it to make you feel like he has no restraint? Is it to build up that kind of dread? Because to me, I'm not upset with the character when that happens. I'm more upset with the writers.
Well, yeah, and it's about an experience. And I think that's the thing where my thoughts on the whole idea of Terrifier, it's something that Would I prefer if this never came out? Yeah, probably. I think what's happening though, and the reason why, let me give a little bit of backstory about money, finances for this film.
It made buckets.
Terrifier 2 specifically cost $250,000. That's it. $250,000. Not even
That's
half a
crazy.
million. And it made like around $20-ish million, I believe. Some people will be like, it only made $20 million, and it's like, well, look at how much it cost. This movie cost $2 million, so they put a good amount of money behind this one compared to the first and second one. Mm-hmm. It's made $30 million now, and it's still going to make more.
Yeah.
It's probably going to end, I'm thinking it's going to end between 40 to 50 million. 40 to 50 million, my guess, $2 million budget. We're going to get like a bunch of more movies. There's a whole universe they're probably trying to create.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me.
And the reason why I say that is because clearly money talks, and it shows that there is an audience for this, and they barely marketed it. So this movie actually cost, I think in total with marketing, either it's between $2 to $3 million. So one of the most minimal uses of marketing, like spending ever. That's what really studios are trying to figure out, how this happened, because they barely spent any money on marketing. One, it's because of the fan base. People who are very low key are talking about it, which then gets other people like me wanting to check it out out of curiosity. Sure. Exactly. It's word of mouth. It's curiosity. People saying things on TikTok like, this was the craziest scene. Oh my God, I can't believe this was in a movie. Holy crap. That, I believe, is one of the big reasons why it's making so much money and why it's becoming a staple thing in horror right now. It's not the staple thing or top 3, but it's becoming one of the big things, I think, and will maybe grow.
What is
like
this?
Shock value?
Oh, shock value
horror.
It. Okay.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
it's shock value horror. That's a good way to put it. But I respect what you're saying though, Tim, because I personally don't think it's a movie that needed to come out, but it is, and people are talking about it.
I think what most upsets me, honestly, is like, you want to make your horror movie? Fine. You want to have people get like chainsawed in the shower? Gross, but fine. Like, that's been around in horror forever. I got some pretty hard feelings about when a writer can do anything and is like, let's kill kids.
Like, I wouldn't be, no offense to Damien Leone, I think that's his name. Probably a great human being, I would like to think. But would not be surprised.
A lot of people in horror are super nice. Like, the guy who plays Art is apparently really fun to work with.
Oh, I heard he's, a very delightful person. I get that sentiment where it's kind of like, ick. I don't really, and I'm not saying I want to see more of that. I'm just saying I can understand why it's making money, why there's people who are at least curious. That's not even saying people like it. People are just curious, I think, for the most part.
Sure.
And then there is the audience
and that's more what got the better of me, too. People being like, this scene is crazy. I'm like, all right, what's so crazy about it?
For me, with this whole franchise, now that I've seen all 3, it's not necessarily for me. I am, in a weird way, glad I saw it because it did bring me that satisfaction of, oh, I saw it. I know what the craziest scene is.
And you're a critic, so it's helpful to know what the trends of filmmaking are. It doesn't mean you have to watch everything. Like, if Caligula Uncut came back to theaters, I think you probably wouldn't go see it.
Well, yeah, and there's even certain films like the guy Jack who built a house or something with Matt Dillon. Yeah, where I stopped halfway, or not even halfway, like 30 minutes in. I just didn't want to watch a 3-hour movie of a dude killing women. And it's filmed like realistically. That to me is really disturbing. Yeah. This, it's still disturbing, but it's like now mixing in with like angels and demons and just a clown going crazy. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that it is an experience. It's a theatrical experience, and I think that's part of the reason why people want to go check it out.
Being in a crowded theater when a dude takes a chainsaw up the butt does sound like an experience.
It was packed theater, and people were losing their minds. And honestly, it added to the experience. I'm not going to lie. Like, reality is the experience was a 9 out of 10, like being in the theater, not the movie. But then when you watch it at home, you're going to realize all the flaws and realize, yeah, this movie kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And even the director probably realizes that too. It's like, yeah, it's not like it's Oscars. It's not The Conjuring. People, this amount of money, this amount of positivity for this film says more about this generation and people than I think people actually realize what it's saying.
We're starting to sound like grandpas. This movie says something about this generation, man.
It's just
back
so
in my day, we didn't take chainsaws up the butt. Now horror does butt stuff.
What is this?
I prefer missionary horror myself.
Oh my god.
Like, I get how some movies, part of it is like a theater experience. Like Deadpool 3, I don't think it's a 10 out of 10 movie, but if you get in the right crowd in the right theater, it's like a totally different experience watching it because you're all having fun together. Yeah, that kind of horror is just not my shtick, not my spiel. Horror starting to pivot into cruelty being the point, I don't think that's horror anymore.
This is only the beginning.
And that's upsetting. That is upsetting to me. Rich is like, someday I'll be part of this conversation again. He probably muted us half the time.
He's like, I think I can get some edits done.
No. He probably muted us half the time.
He's like, I don't want to hear about this butt stuff anymore. That's where I draw the line.
That's what scares Rich.
No butt stuff.
That's what scares Rich.
Butt stuff. Clowns and butts.
Yep, butt stuff.
Booty clowns.
Can't do it.
Clowns clapping. Booty clowns clapping cheeks.
Yo, if I ever see someone get a phone call and the contact IC says booty clown,
you know what's happening.
I don't know what's happening. That's what scares me.
Crippling failure. That is actually a real one. That is a real one from me. If we're just starting this flowy conversation, and then into more horror, I guess, vibes. Quick note for me is, yeah, failure. It's always something that I've kind of like...
Oh, is this something you want me to put in the episode?
Oh, yeah, dude. This is a free-flow discussion, man.
Okay.
Failure. Oh, yeah, man. Like, let's get real. Like, when I made that joke earlier, I actually meant it. Spoilers. Failure is, like, up there. Okay. Mixed with, like, not so much anymore. I feel like I've conquered it. But definitely during COVID, I struggled with anxiety. And where I would have to, like, wear a mask and I'd feel confident. Mm-hmm. And, like, people wouldn't see me, like, my mouth wouldn't be, you know, sometimes it does that thing where it's, like twitches.
Yeah.
And I hated when people noticed that. It made me feel so, like, stupid. So when we were wearing masks, I'm like... I could punch a person in the face and be okay. I'm confident. I'm Joseph. What's your name? Don't care.
So masks made you feel better.
They did.
Interesting.
Oh, whenever I'd be I much rather be in a larger room than a smaller room with 10 people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like, my anxiety, through the roof. If I'm at a small group, I do not want to be there. Especially if it's, like, one person I might know, but the rest of them I don't. It's this obligation to, like, say hi to every person and then maybe have a 1 to 2 minute conversation. Especially Joseph back then hated that. Wear a mask. I'm Joseph Curtis. You can't see my mouth. You can only see my eyes. That was a real fear for me. But mixing in with that, it's like failure, anxiety. And today it's still failure, not so much that, but that was a huge thing that I dealt with. That's something that was very scary to me. It's kind of funny because I do this and I talk a lot. Yeah, I hated talking to people. Hated it. And I work for church, which says a lot, I feel like. Nothing against, like, churches or anything, but it just says, I guess, more for me, where it's like, dang, somebody in that position where you're, like, going around with a camera, you're, like, filming people all the time. Yeah, that's something I struggled with. And it was a very huge fear for me. So when I'd go take photos,
just shoving the camera in people's face and being like, "Don't mind me."
Yeah, no, it's a thing. It's a thing, and I try not to. It's still to this day. I try not to get into people's, like, moments, you know, especially during worship. But you know, there's, like, all those memes of the guys like, oh, when someone's crying, you're like, yes, cry more. just right there, just portrait mode. Yes! Oh my god, it's gonna be amazing for the story. Yes! Let me get a little steal of that little still moment for my reel on Instagram. Yes, love it. But yeah, that was a real thing for me. And failure being more of the thing for me that's kind of scary is failure of big expectations that may never happen is something I do struggle with there and there. You know, not like with every single thing, not with every goal, but certain goals. Oh yeah, like that is a huge thing that I'm still battling internally. So I would say, yeah, that's like to start this conversation in a really, I guess, serious way is, yeah, crippling fear.
Yeah, I rolled up with like a movie and a TV show. Joseph was like crippling fear, anxiety, the pandemic, failure of dreams, my jaw, and I'm like, yeah, I got like a movie and a show. I don't.
I like to just knock you down a little bit, just unexpected.
Yeah, no, just trivialize everything that I was planning on talking about. Make it look very minuscule.